The night slips across the medieval countryside with a quiet clarity that feels both immediate and strangely inviting. It settles over fields and cottages in a calm sweep that hints at stories beginning to wake beneath the fading light. In this first breath of dusk, the land opens itself just enough to draw you gently forward. Its stillness invites quiet curiosity as the world shifts into softer tones and slower movements. The countryside stretches outward in long, unhurried lines, each path drifting between small cottages, open meadows, and clusters of low trees that sway with the faintest touch of the evening breeze. The air cools in a gradual hush, gathering the faint scent of earth that has rested beneath countless seasons. In this quiet light, edges soften, colors fade into gentle blues and muted golds, and the distant outlines of villages seem to drift into one another like shapes, remembered rather than sharply seen. Footsteps fall more slowly along the worn paths, and even the smallest motions, the turning of leaves, the settling of thatched roofs, seem to move with a softened rhythm. Within this calm, a different picture of medieval life begins to form, a picture far removed from the idea of peasants, rooted permanently to the soil. Instead, the land reveals traces of movement, small but steady, carried out through familiar roads that lead from one settlement to the next. People walk these routes with quiet purpose, some carrying goods, some seeking work, others simply moving because the season shifts, or an opportunity rises beyond the fields they know. Their journeys are not dramatic or hurried. They unfold like slow breaths across the countryside, shaped by simple needs and practical intentions that guide them from one place to another. As the evening deepens, this world opens further, inviting you to imagine lives shaped not only by the soil beneath their feet, but also by the paths that extended beyond the village boundaries. These paths were narrow, sometimes uneven, but always present, connecting distant markets, nearby hamlets, and small gatherings where news and small traditions passed gently from traveler to traveler. In this soft telling, the medieval landscape becomes less a closed circle and more a quiet web of motion, each step blending into a larger pattern that carried stories, skills, and simple observations across regions. So breathe in this calm, letting the stillness of the countryside drift slowly around you. Tonight, we walk through these lives not with urgency, but with the ease of tracing a long, peaceful road at dusk. No hurried thoughts, no sharp turns, only the steady rhythm of time and the gentle footsteps of people who wandered farther than history often remembers. A landscape more mobile than it appears. In the soft hush of medieval mornings, when the first pale light drifted across low hills and the cool air still held the faint scent of night, villagers stepped gently into another day, shaped by the land. Their movements followed familiar rhythms, tending fields, feeding animals, mending the tools that kept their small world steady. It is tempting to imagine these people as rooted permanently to the soil beneath their feet, their lives unfolding in narrow circles drawn around the boundaries of their farms. Yet beneath this calm surface lay a quieter truth. The countryside whispered with subtle currents of motion, and many villagers, more than stories often recall, walked far beyond the borders of their homes, their footsteps weaving a quiet pattern of travel across the land. A farmer might leave at first light, taking a path smoothed by generations of travelers, heading toward a nearby market several miles away. These roads wound through meadows, where tall grasses brushed against his legs, passed beneath canopies of trees that filtered the morning sun, and crossed small wooden bridges that arched over streams murmuring softly below. A craftsman might disappear for weeks at a time, following broader routes that led toward larger towns, where work was more plentiful and the chance to trade goods more promising, and seasonal workers, guided by the cycles of the harvest, drifted gently from manor to manor, offering their labor where it was needed most, moving with the turning of seasons rather than the rigid boundaries often imagined for medieval life. These journeys unfolded without fanfare. There were no proclamations, no urgent departures, only the quiet decision of a villager tying on a cloak, gathering a small bundle of belongings, and stepping onto a path well known and well worn. Travelers did not rush. They walked steadily, their pace set by daylight, weather, and the weight of simple tasks that waited at their destination. The countryside, often thought of as static and still, actually carried the faint but constant movement of people making their way between settlements, each step blending into a wider tapestry of daily mobility. Along these routes, the landscape revealed itself in soft layers. Old Roman roads, cracked, uneven, yet still guiding travelers, intersected with dirt paths etched into the earth by countless feet. Meadows dipped into shallow valleys. Forest edges shimmered with the movement of leaves, swaying as breezes drifted through. Villagers learned to read these features with quiet familiarity. A certain tree marked a turning point. A wide stone signaled the halfway mark to another settlement. A bend in the road, shaded by branches, became a resting place for generations. Those who traveled carried little with them. A small cloth bundle held food, hard bread, a bit of cheese, dried fruit. A knife hung at their belt for practical use. A cup, a water skin, and perhaps a spare piece of clothing completed their belongings. Coins, when present, were hidden carefully, sewn into hems or tucked into seams. Their travel was shaped by simplicity, by the need to move lightly across long stretches of land where every step was felt and every mile was earned through patience. Nights on the road were spent wherever circumstances allowed. Sometimes a small tavern offered warmth and a place to sleep. Other times a traveler settled beneath a sheltering tree or along the covered porch of a farmhouse, listening to the quiet symphony of crickets and wind as evening deepened. Movement acted as a gentle thread connecting villages that might otherwise seem isolated. When a young man returned from working in a distant town, he carried more than his earnings. He brought stories, new tools being used, different methods of building, small changes in the way crops were planted. These bits of knowledge slipped quietly into local routines, influencing daily life in subtle ways. A craftsman who learned a new technique brought it home, adapting it to the needs of his community. Even simple observations, different colors of clothing, new types of pots, unfamiliar cooking habits, were shared during long evenings beside the hearth, drifting slowly through households and shaping customs over time. The countryside, far from being a closed world, pulsed with these small exchanges. Each traveler became a messenger, carrying pieces of one place to another, allowing ideas to spread like seeds caught in a mild wind. Villagers may not have traveled constantly, but when they did, their journeys formed a network of quiet communication that linked distant places through soft, unbroken lines of motion. Even those who rarely left their village felt the echo of this mobility. Goods from nearby markets appeared on their tables. News arrived through traveling workers. Festivals in distant towns introduced new songs or crafts that eventually settled into local tradition. In this way, movement shaped medieval life even for those who stayed close to home, its influence drifting gently through communities in ways both visible and hidden. Yet the reality of mobility held its limits. Many peasants lived and died within sight of familiar fields, choosing routine and stability over long roads. Not all had the strength or opportunity to travel far, and the demands of caring for land and family often kept them rooted. Movement was possible, but not required. The decision to walk beyond the village gate depended on need, comfort, and the quiet balance each person sought within their life. Still, the presence of travelers ensured that every village, no matter how small, was part of a larger world. In this softened telling, the medieval countryside becomes a place of calm and gentle motion. Roads that stretched through fields and forests served as subtle lifelines, carrying the footsteps of people who walked with patience, purpose, and an understanding of the land shaped by long familiarity. Their journeys did not strive for drama or significance. They simply unfolded, step by step, weaving a quiet mobility into the landscape, giving the medieval world a rhythm far more fluid than history often suggests. And in the soft memory of these journeys, the countryside rests again, still but never truly silent, holding the traces of countless footsteps that once moved gently across its winding paths. Permission, granted with quiet simplicity. In the quiet order of medieval village life, the act of leaving one's home did not unfold with the weighty difficulty people often imagine. Instead, the process moved with a calm practicality shaped by small routines, familiar relationships, and the steady rhythm of daily work. When a villager wished to travel, whether for trade, labor, errands, or simple necessity, the first step was usually a quiet conversation with the steward of the manor, the individual who maintained records, oversaw tasks, and tended to local matters with a measured hand. This exchange rarely held drama. A villager stepped into the steward's hall, waited in the cool stillness of the room, and explained their intention with simple, straightforward words. The steward, accustomed to hearing these requests, typically nodded in understanding, asked a few practical questions, and granted permission with an easy acceptance that reflected the gentle functioning of rural life rather than rigid control. There were no stacks of parchment to fill, no lengthy declarations, only a shared recognition that the rhythms of work and life sometimes required people to follow paths beyond the edges of the village. With permission given, the villager prepared for the journey in a manner shaped by both habit and necessity. Their belongings were few: a layer of clothing for warmth, a small bundle of food, a tool or two in case repairs were needed along the road, and perhaps a handful of coins secured in a hidden seam. These items were gathered quietly, often before dawn, when the world still rested in a cool shadow, and the light returning to the horizon had not yet reached its full shape. The air at that hour carried the smell of damp earth, the soft bleat of animals waking, and the easy stillness of a village suspended between sleep and morning. The traveler stepped outside with measured steps, breathing in the landscape that stretched outward, knowing the path ahead was long but steady, familiar though untaken for some time. Leaving the village itself felt gentle rather than abrupt. Narrow lanes bordered by hedges gave way to open fields, where the soil bore marks of plows pulled through it season after season. Birds moved low across the fields, their wings catching early light in slow strokes. Travelers walked without rush, their strides shaped by the understanding that distance was covered through patience rather than speed. The first stretch of the journey might involve passing cottages where smoke rose in thin threads from morning fires, or fields where early workers greeted the dawn with slow movement and steady hands. There was no sense of secrecy or tension in these departures. People came and went when needed, and the land accepted their footsteps with the calmness of a world accustomed to quiet motion. As the traveler moved farther from the village, the road widened into the soft presence of the countryside. Meadows rolled across gentle rises marked by wildflowers shifting in the breeze. Forests gathered at the edges of sight, their trees creating patterns of shadow that changed with each passing hour. In these spaces, movement felt unhurried and natural. The road itself carried signs of past travelers, small footprints dried into the earth, cart tracks fading but still visible, and the occasional stone set aside where someone had once rested. The villager walking this route moved in harmony with the land, listening to the rustle of leaves, the steady hum of insects, and the distant murmur of water flowing through unseen creeks. The act of traveling was not a disruption to rural life, but an extension of it, a quiet continuation of the same energy that animated fields and cottages. Even when the journey extended beyond a single day, the rhythm remained soft. A traveler might pause at midday beneath the shade of an old tree, open their small cloth bundle, and eat a modest meal of bread and cheese while watching the landscape settle around them. The warmth of the sun played across stones, grasses swayed with slow grace, and every sound carried the tranquility of a countryside used to time unfolding patiently. At dusk, if no inn or shelter appeared, the traveler found a place to rest beside a hedgerow or along the edge of a field, trusting the land to cradle them through the night. Light faded into soft blues, stars emerged carefully, and the world shifted into a calm darkness that surrounded the traveler like a quilt of quiet air. These journeys, though simple, wove invisible threads through medieval society. A person leaving one village and arriving at another carried small pieces of knowledge with them, observations about tools, crops, prices at distant markets, or changes in neighboring communities. These bits of information drifted through conversations, slowly shaping decisions and influencing daily life without fanfare. Similarly, goods moved along these same paths, changing hands in small exchanges that kept villages connected even when separated by long distances. The movement of people, though modest, allowed rural life to remain flexible, informed, and quietly dynamic. The permission granted at the start of each journey reflected the trust woven into medieval communities. Stewards understood the people needed to walk beyond their village borders to maintain livelihoods, strengthen connections, and fulfill tasks that supported both individual families and the broader community. Granting permission was therefore not an extraordinary act, but part of the village's natural rhythm, as essential as tending crops or maintaining buildings. This ease of movement contradicts the rigid image often painted of medieval peasants, showing instead a world that balanced responsibility with flexibility and structure with gentle understanding. The villagers themselves embraced this balance. They knew the needs of their homes, their fields, and their families, Yet they also recognized the importance of traveling when circumstances required it. Their journeys were not heroic quests, but quiet acts of daily life, performed with the same steady focus they brought to their work. And when they returned, stepping back into familiar lanes, they entered their routines again with seamless ease, carrying whatever insights or goods they had gathered from the road. In this softened retelling of history, the medieval countryside becomes a place of gentle departures and quiet returns. Travelers drift in and out of villages like leaves, carried by a mild breeze, guided not by urgent demands but by the natural flow of necessity, opportunity, and time. Permission was granted with simplicity, journeys unfolded with calm purpose, and the land itself held all of it with a steady patience that shaped the medieval world far more than constraints ever did. Traveling light, moving slowly. Travel in the medieval countryside moved with a softness shaped by necessity rather than speed, and peasants who set out on long paths understood that the weight they carried would shape every hour of the road ahead. They packed their belongings with deliberate care, choosing only what could be managed comfortably across miles of uneven ground. A spare garment folded tightly, a simple cloak, a small wrapped meal of coarse bread and cheese, a wooden cup or a thin metal one, a knife used for all manner of daily tasks, and a water skin that sloshed gently against the hip. These were the quiet essentials of a traveler who expected long stretches of walking beneath open skies. A few coins, carefully hidden, might rest under a stitched seam of a sleeve or be tucked into the lining of a small cloth pouch. Everything else was left behind because the road rewarded lightness and punished excess with each growing mile. As these travelers stepped beyond the boundary of their village, the world opened slowly yet steadily before them. Paths were not marked clearly, nor shaped into firm stone walkways. Instead, they appeared as subtle lines pressed into the earth by countless feet that had passed the same way across generations. Dirt paths wound across meadows, where tall grasses brushed lightly against the edges of clothing, whispering in the breeze as if greeting every traveler with the same gentle rustle. Trails dipped into narrow hollows, shaded by trees whose branches filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns. The remains of old Roman roads appeared in fragments, stretches of stone broken and scattered, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and weathered by time until they resembled the bones of a world long past. Travelers stepped across these varied surfaces with patience, letting their pace adjust naturally to the terrain beneath their feet. The rhythm of the journey settled into a soft steadiness. Boots or bare feet met the ground with muted thuds, the sound blending with the rustle of grasses, the calls of distant birds, and the low hum of insects warming in the morning light. The countryside moved around them in slow waves of color and sound, the shimmer of light on streams, the shifting shadows beneath trees, the soft rise of hills appearing and fading like breathing patterns across the land. They walked without hurry, not because of laziness, but because the road itself allowed no rushing. A traveler who pushed too quickly would tire long before the day's end, while one who matched the land's quiet rhythm could walk for hours with a calm endurance shaped by both habit and necessity. When rain fell, soft at first, and then more insistently, the road transformed into a mixture of mud, puddles, and slick patches that required careful steps. Travelers learned to follow the edges of fields or move toward the higher ground where the soil held firm. When fog settled thick over the countryside, the world shrank into muted shapes, and travelers relied on the faint line of the path beneath their feet, or the distant silhouettes of trees standing like quiet sentinels in the mist. Through each shift in weather, the traveler adapted, their pace changing naturally to meet the day as it unfolded. By afternoon, warmth gathered along the path, and the traveler might stop beneath the spread of a tree whose branches offered shade. Meals were simple, unwrapped with a slow practicality. A piece of bread torn by hand, a small bite of cheese, perhaps a dried fruit or two. Water was sipped sparingly from the water skin, each swallow cool and grounding. These pauses were moments of gentle stillness, where the land and the traveler existed together in a shared quiet. No urgency pressed against their thoughts. The day continued at its own pace, and the traveler followed with an easy acceptance, shaped by long habit. As the sun dipped lower, the world shifted into softer tones. Birds quieted. The warm light stretched across fields and turned the edges of the road into a muted gold. Travelers looked for shelter, a small inn near a crossroads, a simple alehouse, or a family farmhouse where a traveler might rest in exchange for small coin or a bit of labor. If none appeared, they settled where the land allowed, beside a hedgerow, beneath a cluster of trees, or near the gentle rise of a hill that blocked the wind. The earth held the warmth of the day, and as it cooled slowly, the traveler arranged cloak and belongings into a simple nest of comfort for the night. Above them, stars emerged in slow patterns, one by one, spreading across the wide sky like grains of light scattered by a patient hand. Night on the road carried its own quiet character. Sounds softened, blending into a single low hum that seemed to cradle the traveler rather than disturb them. The wind brushed lightly along the edges of grass. Occasionally, the distant bark of a dog or the muted call of an owl drifted across the land, reassuring rather than alarming. Travelers slept to these small noises, letting them form a gentle chorus that accompanied the slow drift of the night. At dawn, the world brightened once more, and travelers rose with the land. Cloaks were shaken free of dew. Bundles were tied again with simple knots. The smell of damp grass, mixed with the faint scent of earth warming beneath new light, filled the air. Each new morning carried the promise of more road, more soft steps, more slow miles unfolding beneath steady feet. In this softened telling, travel becomes not an ordeal, but a slow unfolding of landscape and time. Every step offers a small moment of connection to the land. Every pause invites calm reflection, and every mile deepens the traveler's quiet understanding of the world around them. They walk lightly, not only because their packs are small, but because the road itself encourages gentleness, patience, and a steady acceptance of the long distances that shape medieval life. Traveling light and moving slowly, they become part of the land's rhythm, unhurried, enduring, quietly present on the paths that stretch across the medieval countryside. A network wider than expected. Medieval life is often imagined as confined to the boundaries of a single field, a single village, or a single stretch of countryside. Yet the truth moves with a much wider and quieter rhythm than such images suggest. Across the centuries, villagers who lived among rolling fields and modest cottages were not as fixed in place as stories sometimes portray. Many walked far beyond the familiar edges of their farmland, setting out across landscapes shaped by forests, marshes, meadows, and winding routes that connected even the smallest hamlets to broader regions. Their journeys did not unfold with drama or spectacle, but with the slow, steady certainty of people who knew the land intimately and understood how to navigate its gentle contours. These villagers, though rooted in soil through daily labor, stepped onto roads that carried them to places far beyond their home plots, forming paths that linked communities across miles of open terrain. Some set out on foot from quiet hamlets tucked between low hills, following narrow footpaths that crossed fields where grain swayed in the breeze like soft waves. They walked past stone markers worn smooth by years of wind and weather, through patches of dense woodland where sunlight filtered through branches in broken stripes, and across stretches of open ground where the horizon appeared endlessly wide. Others traveled along more established routes that led toward market towns, bustling with sellers, animals, traders, and all the subtle movements of daily commerce. These towns, though modest by modern standards, felt expansive to rural travelers, drawing them into spaces filled with new faces, new sounds, and goods from places they had only heard about in passing. There were villagers who ventured even farther, moving toward ports where ships creaked gently against docks, their ropes swaying with the rhythm of tides. These coastal areas held an energy unfamiliar to inland communities, the call of distant gulls, the scent of salt carried by wind, the vast opening of the sea beyond wooden piers. Ships resting in these harbors connected to distant shores, carrying travelers, goods, and quiet hopes bundled into small cargoes. Villagers who found themselves near these bustling edges of the world sometimes drifted among sailors, merchants, and workers, absorbing glimpses of lives shaped by distant places. Though most did not board ships themselves, the presence of such movement expanded their understanding of the world and threaded their own experiences into a wider fabric of human travel. Skilled workers, smiths, carpenters, weavers, stonecutters, often followed opportunity from one region to another. A craftsman might leave home for weeks or months, taking with him the knowledge of his craft and returning with new techniques learned from others. The land acted as both guide and companion, its familiar contours shaping movement with quiet direction. As these workers moved, they shared skills with those they met, creating a gentle exchange of practical knowledge across the countryside. These exchanges, though subtle, contributed to the evolution of tools, construction methods, and artistic designs, weaving the expertise of scattered villages into a shared pattern of slow, steady innovation. Young men and women seeking new prospects traveled as well, walking across lands that stretched farther than anything they had known in childhood. They followed stories of seasonal work, better wages, or simple curiosity driven by the desire to see what lay beyond the edges of familiar fields. Some settled temporarily in distant villages, finding places where their labor was needed for planting, harvesting, construction, or craft work. Others stored what they earned and returned home months later, bringing with them stories shaped by new landscapes, new faces, and the small but meaningful differences that defined each region. The world, through their quiet movements, grew broader with each passing year. These individual journeys, modest on their own, blended into long, delicate connections across the land. Villages far apart became linked through footsteps, voices, and the exchange of simple knowledge, a traveler might bring home news of a new type of grain being grown in a neighboring county, or describe a market stall filled with tools whose shapes differed slightly from those familiar at home. Someone else might speak of distant construction projects, clever farming techniques, or changes in local customs. These small pieces of information drifted through households, fields, and communal gatherings, shaping the quiet evolution of medieval society with soft, persistent influence. Over time, these paths formed a subtle network, a living map created not by ink, but by footsteps pressed into earth. Each route, whether a narrow trail used by local farmers or a broader road marked by the wheels of carts, played a role in carrying voices, goods, and ideas from one settlement to another. Though no grand plan organized these pathways, they formed naturally through the gradual movements of people who walked with purpose, shaped by seasons, cycles of work, and personal needs. Their repeated journeys turned simple paths into dependable roads and linked rural communities with towns, towns with ports, and ports with lands even farther away. This network, quiet yet resilient, served as the lifeline of everyday medieval life. Markets pulsed with goods arriving from distant farms. Workshops thrived on shared techniques that traveled across miles. Villages learned from one another through subtle observations carried by those who wandered. Far from being isolated, rural communities existed in a state of gentle connection, bound together not by force or decree, but by the steady motion of their own inhabitants. Travelers carried stories with them as well, soft recollections of landscapes they passed through, descriptions of gatherings in other towns, observations of tools, clothing, or customs unfamiliar to their home villages. These stories drifted like breezes through communal spaces, shaping imagination and understanding. Even those who never traveled beyond their immediate surroundings felt the quiet reach of distant places through these shared accounts. They learned that the world was wider than their fields, more varied than the rhythms of their own villages, yet connected through the simple act of people walking steadily along the same roads. In this softened telling, the medieval world becomes a landscape threaded with gentle motion, shaped not by grand journeys but by the patient footsteps of ordinary people. These villagers, though anchored by responsibilities and routines, contributed to a network of connection that extended far beyond their farmland. Through slow, steady movement, travel measured by days and seasons, they wove a countryside united not by borders but by simple paths walked year after year. The roads belonged to everyone and to no one, serving as quiet companions to generations of travelers who carried pieces of one place into the heart of another, letting information drift across the land like a soft wind that never truly stopped moving. The gentle spread of knowledge and custom. As villagers walked the long paths between one settlement and the next, they carried with them far more than the faint imprint of their footsteps on the soft earth. Their journeys gathered small fragments of distant places, and these fragments drifted quietly from mind to mind as travelers paused to rest, to trade, or to share a simple conversation at the end of a long day. A tool seen in passing, a hammer with a slightly different head, a plow built with a clever angle, a pot shaped to hold heat a bit longer, would catch a traveler's attention. Without urgency, the memory of that object followed them home, settling softly into the mind until it resurfaced in a discussion by the hearth, or a suggestion made beside a workshop bench. In this way, one village's small improvement became another village's quiet discovery, and knowledge seeped gradually across the countryside like water, finding its way through gentle cracks in the soil. The same was true for skills learned along the road. A traveler might pause to watch a stranger sharpen a blade with a motion unfamiliar to them, or observe a cook preparing food using a method rarely seen at home. These moments, subtle and unannounced, imprinted themselves like soft impressions left on damp clay. When the traveler eventually returned to their own village, they brought these impressions with them, not as authoritative instructions, but simply as possibilities, ideas shaped by casual observation. A neighbor might notice a new way of tying bundles of herbs, or a slightly altered technique for storing grain so it lasted a little longer through winter. These quiet transmissions of knowledge unfolded slowly, each one spreading with the natural rhythm of conversation, imitation, and gentle curiosity. Even the smallest pieces of news drifted across great distances, reshaping the countryside not with force but with soft whispers that traveled in the pockets of human movement. Someone returning from a distant town might mention that a neighboring region had begun trying a new crop, or that a nearby workshop was crafting tools with a different style. These bits of information were often simple, delivered without ceremony, yet they held a certain weight. In a world shaped by the patience of seasons and the steady repeat of familiar tasks, even the slightest variation felt like a window opening to someplace larger. Villagers tucked away these impressions and allowed them to settle quietly into their understanding of how others lived, worked, and adapted to the cycles of the land. Cultural habits moved with similar ease, blending from village to village as though carried by a soft breeze. A festival in one settlement might involve a particular dance, a specific decoration of ribbons, or a way of arranging lanterns that caught the eye of a visitor from another community. Months later, as another celebration approached in that visitor's home village, the memory of what they had seen might inspire a small change, a different pattern of movement, a new arrangement of colors, or a gesture added to a familiar ritual. No one claimed ownership over these shifts. They formed gradually, shaped by the gentle merging of impressions and by the natural tendency of people to adapt and embellish traditions in ways that felt warm and familiar. Clothing styles drifted across the land in the same quiet manner. A traveler might notice a new cut of tunic or a certain color of thread favored in a distant region. Without thinking much of it, they carried that memory home, where a local weaver or tailor might adopt the idea, altering it slightly to match local materials and preferences. As months passed, the change became part of the community's own customs, indistinguishable from the older styles that had shaped daily life for generations. Nothing spread quickly, yet everything spread steadily, carried in small steps and shared in gentle conversations. Craftsmanship evolved along these wandering lines as well. A potter traveling through another village might notice a technique for glazing pottery that yielded a richer color or a smoother surface. A carpenter might observe a way of joining wood that reduced the need for nails. These observations slipped quietly into the memory, waiting for a moment when the artisan found themselves at their workspace, recalling a detail seen far from home. With no fanfare, they tried it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But each attempt contributed to the slow shift of skills that shaped the medieval world, allowing distant communities to share their innovations without ever meeting directly. These subtle exchanges did not require urgency or deliberate organization. They unfolded with the same softness as seeds carried by the wind, settling wherever they happened to land and taking root only when conditions were calm and welcoming. Villagers, often imagined as bound to their soil by rigid routines, acted instead as quiet messengers of culture. They carried not formal teachings or structured lessons, but impressions, ideas, and small details that drifted naturally from one community to another. Their role in shaping the shared identity of regions was gentle yet profound. As these travelers walked, they became living threads, woven through a wide tapestry of customs that stretched across valleys, forests, and farmlands. Each footstep carried a hint of another place. Each conversation added a small note from another voice, and each exchange layered new colors onto the vast landscape of medieval life. Even those who rarely left home felt the touch of distant places through stories brought to them by relatives, workers, merchants, or wandering craftsmen. They learned of new tools, new songs, new habits, and new ways of seeing the world. Over time, this slow spread of knowledge and custom enriched the countryside with a sense of quiet connection. Villages that never shared direct contact still influenced one another through the steady journeys of people whose lives moved in long, soft arcs across the land. The medieval world, in this gentler view, becomes a place shaped not just by the cycles of agriculture or the demands of daily labor, but by the calm, persistent drifting of ideas. These ideas traveled as lightly as the people who carried them, settling into the soil of each community with the unhurried grace of seeds taking root after being stirred by a passing breeze. Through these movements, medieval peasants helped shape a shared cultural landscape, slowly, subtly, and with a steadiness that mirrored the land they tended. Far from being isolated workers, tied permanently to the earth, they became the humble carriers of change, guiding knowledge and custom across the countryside in soft, almost invisible currents that reached farther than anyone walking the road ever realized. The quiet reality of limits. In the wide, slow rhythm of medieval life, even as paths stretched outward and travelers wandered from village to village, the quiet truth remained that many peasants lived most of their days within the familiar borders of home. The fields they tended, the tools they carried, and the animals they cared for created a pattern of responsibilities that held them gently but firmly to the land. Morning after morning, the same view of open fields greeted them, the same cottages lined the same lanes, the same rhythms repeated with the soft certainty of seasons turning in a steady circle. For many, this familiarity brought a sense of comfort, a feeling that the land beneath their feet offered everything they needed, even if the world beyond those boundaries remained unseen. Farms required constant attention. Soil did not rest by itself, and crops grew best when hands that understood them stayed close. A farmer knew when a field needed turning, when weeds grew too thick, or when a storm threatened to flatten tender shoots. These were not tasks that could be set aside for long journeys. Animals needed feeding and care every single day. Families depended on routines that shaped each member's role. An older villager might move more slowly, but their presence carried experience, memory, and the quiet knowledge of how to keep the household running. These connections, woven through years of shared labor, anchored people to the ground in ways that felt natural and deeply rooted. Travel itself, while possible, carried weight. The physical strain of walking long distances was real, especially for those who spent most days bent over fields, lifting tools, and working from dawn to dusk. Roads were unpredictable. Some were well-trodden and easy to follow, while others disappeared into muddy stretches after rain or became blocked by fallen branches and shifting roots. Changing weather could turn a simple day's walk into a difficult challenge. Cold air stiffened joints, heat drained energy, and sudden storms forced travelers to seek shelter under hedges, trees, or whatever cover the land offered. These realities shaped decisions quietly. A peasant might consider traveling, but choose instead to stay close to home, letting the comfort of familiarity outweigh the uncertainty of distant paths. For older villagers, the idea of long travel often faded naturally with time. Their steps grew slower, their strength more precious, and the fields they had known since childhood seemed more meaningful than roads stretching toward unknown places. They had seen the seasons cycle many times. They had felt the ground shift with frost, rain, and the softness of warm earth. Their memories were rooted in specific places: a tree where they once rested, a stream where they collected water, a field where they played as children before they learned to work. The thought of wandering far from these quiet landmarks held little appeal. Even younger villagers, though stronger and more curious, weighed their decisions carefully. Some wished to see new places, but many found their hopes and ambitions growing comfortably within the boundaries they already knew. A marriage, a newborn child, a family need, all could shape choices gently but decisively. A young man might dream of traveling to a busy marketplace or a distant town, but decide instead to help with repairs before winter arrived. A young woman might consider seeking work elsewhere, but choose to remain with her family through an important harvest. These choices unfolded quietly, without regret, guided by a sense of belonging to people and places that had shaped them. The medieval world allowed movement. Roads existed, paths connected villages, and the countryside opened naturally for those who wished to walk it. But the world did not insist on travel. No expectation pushed peasants to roam constantly, nor did society demand that everyone seek new horizons. Instead, movement existed as an option, a gentle possibility available when needed, not a requirement pressing itself upon every household. Each person measured their journey according to their own strength, needs, and comfort. And for many, that measurement led them back again and again to the steady rhythms of home. The balance between mobility and stillness created a countryside shaped by delicate contrasts. Beside the few who traveled far were the many who walked only the paths between their fields and the village center. Beside the stories of distant markets and ports were the stories of those who tended the same soil year after year. Yet neither group was more important than the other. The travelers brought knowledge and connection, while the stayers preserved continuity, stability, and the memory of how life unfolded across generations. In this gentle interplay, the medieval world found its shape. Mobility existed but quietly, threading itself into the land without overwhelming the lives of those who chose not to wander. Stillness existed, but not as confinement, rather as a choice made with calm acceptance, rooted in the understanding that life's meaning could be found in the familiar patterns that surrounded them. In this softened telling, the limits of medieval life do not appear harsh or confining. Instead, they resemble the natural boundaries of a garden, edges that guide growth rather than restricted. Villagers lived within these limits not because they were forced, but because their lives were interwoven with tasks, relationships, and places that shaped their days gently and steadily. Their world was broad enough to allow movement and grounded enough to offer comfort. Within that balance, they found a rhythm that sustained them, season after season, in the quiet harmony of their homes and fields. A different picture of the medieval peasant. Modern imagination often reduces the medieval peasant to a single frozen image, a figure permanently bent over a plow, with eyes fixed on the soil and footsteps anchored firmly to one familiar patch of earth. Yet when we look more closely, the edges of that picture soften, revealing a far more layered, flexible, and quietly dynamic life than the common stereotype suggests. The medieval villager lived within rhythms shaped by nature, community, responsibility, and opportunity, but they also moved with an alert awareness of the world around them. They were not merely passive laborers, but thoughtful participants in a landscape that changed subtly with each season and with each choice made across a lifetime. The medieval villager observed the land with steady attention. They understood the way clouds gathered before rain, the way frost clung to the ground in early winter, and the way small shifts in wind signaled the turning of a season. These observations were not academic studies, but natural extensions of daily life. A farmer could tell from the feel of soil in his palm whether the earth needed rest or water. A woman gathering herbs knew which plants would thrive in shade and which required open light. Children, growing with the land as their classroom, learned the sounds of birds, the patterns of streams, and the hidden trails through woods long before they understood written words. This connection to nature formed the foundation of their knowledge, shaping decisions from planting to building to traveling. And travel did come, quietly but persistently. Though many peasants spent most days near home, moments arose when necessity, curiosity, or opportunity gently nudged them beyond familiar boundaries. A man might walk dozens of miles to find seasonal work, moving patiently from one manor to another as the cycle of harvest demanded. A young woman might accompany relatives to a distant fair, following winding paths across forests and meadows, discovering that the world stretched wider than she had imagined. Others simply drifted outward in search of companionship, trade, or new prospects. These journeys were not heroic expeditions, but steady, practical ventures shaped by endurance and calm resilience. The medieval villager walked far, often farther than modern stories suggest, covering distances slowly, step by step, with a rhythm built from necessity rather than adventure. Their travels stitched together a reality often overlooked. Peasants held a working knowledge of the legal and social structures around them. They understood agreements, obligations, and practical rights in ways shaped by daily experience. When disputes arose over land boundaries, grazing rights, or shared resources, villagers often resolved these matters together, drawing on customs handed down over generations. They were not isolated from the function of law, but aware of it, capable of standing before stewards or local officials to explain their needs or concerns. This awareness emerged from living within a world where every small decision carried weight. When to plant, when to travel, when to help neighbors, when to adjust a field's layout, when to accept work elsewhere. Resourcefulness defined their days. A broken tool became an opportunity for repair rather than waste. Scraps of cloth were sewn into new garments or repurposed for everyday use. A fallen tree might provide firewood, building material, or shade for resting travelers. Peasants adapted constantly, finding ways to adjust to unexpected weather, shifting landscapes, or new arrangements within the village. When a traveler brought news or demonstrated a new craft method, villagers learned quickly, integrating practical ideas into their routines. This adaptability formed part of the quiet strength that allowed medieval communities to endure through years of change, scarcity, and opportunity alike. Their world, often imagined as a confined box, was in truth shaped by layers of personal choice and circumstance. A villager might remain close to home because the land required their attention or because their family depended on them. Another might leave briefly to work in a distant region, returning later with new skills and stories. Some traveled widely, while others walked only familiar paths, yet all lived within a landscape shaped by slow decisions made day by day. These decisions, small, subtle, and often unnoticed by history, created the fluid motion that quietly animated medieval life. The medieval countryside, seen from this broader perspective, becomes a place alive with gentle movement. Travelers walked roads that connected distant hamlets, carrying quiet traces of one village into another. Local customs blended and spread, shifting slightly in each new setting. News traveled through conversations shared beside fields, outside workshops, or under the rafters of simple houses. Families grew, changed, and adapted to the needs of each season. In these patterns of motion, the land itself appears less static and more like a living network, shaped not by rigid boundaries, but by a steady flow of human presence. In this softer view, the medieval peasant emerges as a figure far more nuanced than the fixed stereotype of someone tied eternally to the soil. They were individuals with hopes, observations, and choices woven through their daily lives. They cared for the land not out of confinement, but out of a deep understanding of its rhythms. They traveled when needed, stayed when needed, worked with patience, and moved with the quiet determination that defined their era. Their steps, long or short, frequent or rare, became part of a larger tapestry of movement, culture, and continuity that shaped the medieval world. Seen this way, the medieval countryside is not a silent field frozen in time, but a landscape of subtle energy carried forward by countless decisions, adaptations, and gentle journeys. Every villager contributed to this motion, whether by tending crops, sharing news, exchanging skills, or walking the long path to another settlement. Their lives, though simple on the surface, were rich with meaning drawn from connection to the land, to each other, and to the quiet flow of time that shaped each generation. And so, the medieval peasant steps out of the static image held by modern imagination and into a fuller, more flexible reality, one where they are not just workers in a field, but thoughtful participants in a softly shifting world, walking paths that stretched farther than many realize, shaping their lives with patience, awareness, and the quiet strength that comes from living in harmony with the land. The long road under quiet skies. Across the soft rise and fall of medieval seasons, peasants stepped onto long, winding roads that stretched between wide forests, quiet rivers, and distant towns that shimmered faintly on the horizon like memories waiting to be reached. These roads did not call out loudly or promise great adventure. Instead, They offered a slow, patient unfolding of landscape, a gentle path that moved at the same pace as the people who walked it. Travelers followed these trails with calm purpose, their steps shaped by need, hope, opportunity, or the simple pull of curiosity that moved quietly within them. From spring's fresh breezes to winter's crisp stillness, the roads carried countless feet across the countryside, each traveler adding a soft echo to paths already worn by generations long before them. Under these expansive skies, villagers walked beneath light that changed steadily through the day. Morning gold softened the world into warm tones, where fields glowed gently and dew glimmered like small beads scattered across the grass. As hours passed, the sky deepened into fuller blues, shifting slowly toward the muted glow of afternoon. By evening, the landscape settled beneath the soft lavender shades of twilight. Shadows lengthened, breezes calmed, and the air grew cooler as the world prepared for another night. Travelers, wherever they found themselves, paused to rest in this quiet beauty. They settled beside gentle streams, beneath clusters of trees, or along rising hills, where the sunset stretched long across the land. When stars appeared, they felt guidance and comfort in familiar constellations that had watched over them since childhood. No matter how far they wandered, the night sky always felt like home. These journeys did not fill the pages of grand chronicles. No court historian recorded the slow progression of villagers moving from hamlet to market, from farm to town, from region to region, at their own unhurried pace. Yet their steps formed one of the truest and most enduring rhythms of medieval life. Every mile they walked connected small pockets of the countryside, carrying voices, goods, and knowledge across lands that otherwise might have remained apart. While the world often remembers kings, lords, and battles, it was the quiet travelers who shaped the everyday fabric of society. They provided the threads that held distant communities together, stitching regions into a wider whole, not through force, but through simple contact and steady presence. Their travel began in many ways. Some villagers left home in search of seasonal work, walking the long road to places where harvests or repairs demanded extra hands. Others carried goods to market, vegetables, woven cloth, crafted tools, pottery fired carefully in home kilns. Still others walked to visit relatives, deliver messages, or explore opportunities whispered about during gatherings at the edge of fields. Each reason was small in itself, but together they formed a steady pattern of movement across the medieval world. The roads responded by shaping themselves around this human flow, turning into pathways of connection that linked forests, rivers, meadows, and villages into a living network. The travelers walked thoughtfully, matching their pace to the land. They passed along the edges of fields where freshly turned soil released a soft, earthy scent. They followed trails lined with wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze, their colors shifting with each turn of the season. They crossed wooden bridges stretched over clear streams, listening to the quiet murmur of water as it flowed steadily beneath them. In forests, their footsteps softened to match the hush of leaves, blending into a world of birdsong and filtered light. The land revealed itself slowly, inviting travelers to see new details with each passing mile. A familiar hill at a different angle, a village seen from afar, a path once walked now altered by time. Resting places marked the rhythm of their days. At midday, travelers paused beneath tall trees whose branches cast wide circles of shade. They sat on smooth stones or soft grass, enjoying simple meals of bread, cheese, or dried fruit. Water from streams refreshed them, and the steady sounds of nature allowed their minds to settle into quiet reflection. At night, they found comfort beneath open skies or within the humble shelter of small inns or farm porches offered with quiet generosity. Stars appeared overhead with gentle consistency, each one shining steadily, as if acknowledging the long journeys unfolding beneath them. In this soft light, travelers drifted into sleep, feeling the land cradle them just as surely as their home villages once had. Though their names rarely appeared in records, these travelers played an essential role in shaping the medieval world. Their steps carried news of harvests, prices, weather, and small changes happening in distant settlements. They spread methods for crafting tools, preparing food, and managing land. They shared songs, stories, and small customs that blended slowly across regions. Through these exchanges, the countryside became interconnected, not by force or decree, but through the patient flow of human movement. Their quiet presence reminds us that history is not shaped solely by powerful figures or dramatic events. It is also made by those who walked the long, humble roads with steady endurance, people whose journeys left no monuments, but built invisible bridges between communities. Every traveler who set foot on those roads contributed to the shaping of a world far more connected and fluid than the stereotype of isolated medieval villages suggests. And so, under skies that shifted gently from gold to blue to the soft silver of night, peasants walked mile after mile, their footsteps weaving the countryside together. Long after their paths faded into the earth, the quiet truth of their journeys remains. History was never carried only by the hands of rulers, but also by the countless ordinary travelers who moved patiently along roads that time has nearly forgotten, shaping their world one soft footstep at a time. A soft drift into rest. As the night deepens across this gentle landscape, the roads that carried so many quiet footsteps begin to fade into stillness, settling beneath the soft hush of evening. The cottages that dot the countryside grow dim as their hearths cool, and the fields that stretched wide beneath daylight now rest beneath a blanket of muted shadow. Travelers who once walked across valleys and narrow paths have returned to familiar thresholds, letting the calm of home wrap around them like a warm cloak. The world, so full of slow movement and subtle connection, loosens its pace until everything drifts into a peaceful hush. In this softened quiet, the long journeys of countless peasants dissolve into memory. Their steps, once steady along winding trails, now echo only faintly in the imagination, fading like distant ripples on a gentle stream. Yet those steps leave behind an enduring sense of presence, a reminder that the medieval world breathed through the motion of ordinary people who walked patiently beneath shifting skies. They shaped the countryside not with grand declarations, but with steady endurance, thoughtful choices, and the calm resilience that accompanied every mile. Their lives, though simple, held a rhythm that tied one community to another, carrying small fragments of the world across fields and forests, as naturally as the wind carried seeds between distant meadows. Picture the soft outlines of cottages, the steady line of a distant hedgerow, the faint glimmer of moonlight brushing against the roofs of small homes. Imagine the air cooling gently, carrying the scent of earth, grain, and evening dew. This world, once alive with the subtle motion of travelers and workers, now rests in a harmony that feels both ancient and familiar. There is no rush left in it, no demands or expectations, only the deep comfort of stillness returning once more. Let the calm of this scene wrap around you, the way twilight gathers softly around the edges of a quiet field. Let the gentle truth of their lives drift through your thoughts. That movement can be slow, purpose can be subtle, and meaning can come from the smallest actions carried out with steady patience. The medieval countryside, now settling fully into its night, reminds us that even the simplest journeys carry weight, and even the quietest people leave gentle marks upon the land they walked. Their legacy lives not in noise, but in the soft continuity of daily life that flowed from one generation to the next. Now, as the final moments of this story settle into place, allow yourself to drift with them. Let your breath slow, let your body soften, and let the rhythm of this calm world guide you toward rest. The roads have grown silent, the fields have fallen still, and the night has opened its arms. Let the story close gently around you, carrying you softly, steadily, into a peaceful and unhurried sleep.